Good afternoon. Welcome, everyone. This is Christy Beal from Missoula, Montana. I am one of the trustees, and I have been asked by Chris Hagum to chair run the meeting because she's got another meeting that she's in. She will be joining us at some point in time remotely. So I think the first thing we could do is if we could each go around the room and introduce ourselves. And we'll also make sure that we do that with respect to the folks who are online as well, or attending via Teams.
Doug Martin with the Natural Resource Damage Program.
Sonia Nowakowski, Director, DEQ.
Michael Harris, Attorney General's Office.
Bill Shank for the Department of Fish, Wildlife and Parks.
Elizabeth Erickson, Chair of the BNRC Council.
Is there anyone online? Okay. All right. Well, we'll get started with then the fiscal year 2024 funds financial annual update, and we'll turn that over to Miranda.
I can quickly go through these couple of meeting overviews, just a reminder that the meeting is being recorded. And we do ask that all participants state their name when they begin talking so that it's captured for the online audience and for the recording, which will be used as the meeting minutes. You guys have an agenda in your packet, so I won't go through that in detail, but is what we're planning on going through today. I'm Miranda with the Natural Resource Damage Program. I'm going to be going through the financials for the Upper Clark Fork River Basin, BAO, Parrot, and a little brief overview of some of our other funds. There we go. So in your packet, you should have gotten a couple of pages that are some of the details on how some of the financials are calculated and some definitions in case you're not familiar. Something that's come up a lot is how we calculate our general expenses. So I thought I'd briefly go through that, but I'm not going to go through everything in detail. So basically we take all of the direct expenses to each fund. We calculate that as a total for NRDP, and then we take each individual fund direct expenses and divide that by the total to come up with a percentage for each fund. That then gets put into a speed chart, which is used for our general expenses throughout the following fiscal year. If you do have any questions about any of this stuff, though, let me know. So the Upper Clark Fork River Basin Fund, we do have the Butte groundwater. This is the same number that we saw last year. There hasn't been any additional expenses, but there is that deficit of $693,000. And we are working on finding a solution to that. So we have our aquatics category. That's 1.7 million in interest this year, 1.3 million in expenses, with a total of 37.6 million cash available still. We have our terrestrial category with 162,000 in interest, essentially 390 in direct expenses. There it goes, and 3.5 million cash remaining. So then we have the aquatic reserves. There we go. 614,000 in interest with a total of 13.4 million. The terrestrial reserves of 263 essentially in interest and 5.7 million. That leaves these categories, if the clicker works, with a total interest earned this fiscal year of 2.7 million. Well, just over 2.7 million, direct expenses of 1.7 million and 59.6 million cash remaining. So the Upper Clark Fork River Basin also has these other encumbered funds. That's our grants category, which 1.7 million. Something we did a little different this year is I called out on the bottom there the 2 transfers to the education fund, though that number is also included in the actual expenses, but I just wanted to call it out on the bottom to show those transfers. The Dutchman Wetlands has 1.2 million remaining. Milltown has 40,000, total encumbered of 3.3 million. So a total fund cash and invested cash balance of 62 point, sorry, it's a little hard to read, 60.9. Okay, so moving on to Butte Area 1, we have the different categories here. Mine waste area, direct expenses of 206,000, general essentially 71,000, interest earned of 80, with a total balance of 1.7 million. You have your stream restoration expenses of just over $1,000, general of essentially 69,000, 78 in interest, and 1.7 cash balance. And then we have the municipal water expenses of just under 2,000, 30,000 in general expenses, revenues and liabilities, and interest earned of 35,000, with a total of 757,000, though this is contracted and expected to be spent out by the end of this fiscal year. So moving on to recreation, $200 spent there in direct expenses, 46,000 in general expenses, revenues and liabilities, and 52 in interest, leaving it with 1.1 million. Then we have the small projects, $70 in direct expenses, 8,000 in general, and 9,000 in interest, with a total of 198,000. That leaves the total for this fund of 5.5 million. And the numbers in pink there are just a total of those rows. So the Parrot, looking at total direct expenses to the Parrot of 5.6 million, or excuse me, 1.6 million. General expenses of 137,000, interest earned of just under 200,000, leaving a total cash balance of 2.85 million. And the end column is just totals there. Some of our other funds that NRDP manages, the Upper Clark Fork has a cash balance of 24.1 million. Smelter Hill Uplands of 8.4 million, and the education fund, it was CFIP, now Ripple, of 1.5 million. That is all I have for financials. If you have any questions.
Do any of the trustees have questions?
I don't, I think I would just ask if there are anything that jumped out or anything that's of concern. It all looks pretty status quo to me. But as a new member, if there's any concerns about dips and balances or too high of balances, things not moving as quickly as you'd like, I'd just like those.
Miranda, again. Not that we're seeing, although other project managers are going to be talking about some of the projects we're working on and some of the status of some of the funds.
Okay.
I don't have anything to add for the Upper Clark Fork. How about you, Elizabeth?
I have a couple things to add for the Butte Area 1 restoration, and maybe we could just bring up that budget really quickly. And I just wanted to direct everybody's attention to those pink boxes there, because we will, or I will have some comments on those later in the meeting here. Our council has been asking some questions, I guess, about expenses to this fund. We are at the point where we're, at 5.5 million there. And some of the liabilities and revenue funds are $200,000 and against the fund for 2024. And I guess we'll talk a little bit more, getting a little bit more detail on that later in the meeting, but we have been asking some questions about some of the expenses hitting this fund. We've done, besides the re-veg project, which goes through Montana Tech, we haven't done any projects last year. And so a lot of this fund is being spent on doing some other things that we're wondering if should come out of this fund. So I just wanted to direct everybody's attention to those numbers right now and maybe even contrast them with the Upper Clark Fork Fund. Their general expenses and liabilities for 2024 were looks like 134,000 with a much larger fund versus 224,000 for this BAO fund, which is much smaller. So anyway, that I'll fill you in more on that later in the meeting.
This is Christy Beal. I guess one of the questions I have in responding, I guess, and thinking about what you've said, Elizabeth, one of the questions I have is during my tenure on the Upper Clark Fork Council, there's not been, to my knowledge, that we're involved in as the council, a financial monitoring mechanism of how the funds are being spent, that any sort of an audit or something like that happens, but maybe the NRDP does that for us. Is that, I guess it's kind of a question I have, Doug, if you could speak to that and how the spending has been monitored as far as each allocation goes, how the spending gets monitored from a financial fiscal responsibility and accountability aspect.
So this is Doug Martin. We get audited by the Legislative Audit Division a lot on our financial processes, but as far as the budgets for specific projects, for instance, the watershed allocations in the Upper Clark Fork, we do monitor those. We have budgets for each project. We have budgets for all of our task orders. So we do, we are tracking those budgets within those, within individual tasks or individual projects. And overall audit of the program and how we do that. We have been audited on our processes, but I don't think anybody's ever sat down and done a specific audit on a project that we have done to see whether or not it's been cost effective or not. I would note, I won't, I'll wait till we get to the Butte stuff to address Elizabeth's comments.
Okay. Christy Beal again, if someone does have a question about how a specific entity who has been allocated funds, how they're spending it, does anybody watch that?
This is Doug Martin again. Yes. So all the project managers are responsible for their contracts or their task orders that they have with various partners or consultants or engineers that they're working with. And there's a specific budget for that. And those project managers are responsible for monitoring the expenditures within that task order to make sure they are staying within scope and budget for each of those contracts or task orders.
Thank you. Does any other trustee have any questions or comments? If not, we'll open that up to the public for questions or comments on the financials. Miranda, is anybody watching in case anybody on the, oh, nothing online? Okay, thank you. All right. With that, I think we'll turn to the Upper Clark Fork River Basin Aquatic and Terrestrial Resources Restoration Plan Annual Update that Nathan will provide.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Nathan Cook with Natural Resource Damage Program. I'm going to be talking today about the aquatic flow, non-flow, and aquatic monitoring, part of the restoration plan updates. And we're going to pause shortly for questions, and then Doug's going to take over and talk about the terrestrial updates. But before we get into the updates themselves, I thought I'd take a minute to orient you to this project update table. Actually, it's 3 tables in your packet. This table, we put this together a few years ago, and it's kind of a quick look at all of our aquatic, terrestrial, and recreation projects, the status of those projects, whether there's monitoring going on surrounding those projects, whether we or our partners have done O&M in the past year. And something we added as a new column, a new field in this table this year was a match funding column. And so that column has any match funds that were either sought or acquired in 2024. So just over this past year. So all match funds that have been brought to these projects since they were conceived. This table does not capture that, but I can assure you that did happen. So we'll be tracking that from this point forward using this table. And speaking of matching funds, our partners bring a lot of matching funds to our projects. They also bring a lot of in-kind work, all the way from project development, design, construction, implementation, monitoring, O&M. We really couldn't do any of these projects without our partners. So we work a lot with landowners and water users, NGOs like Clark Fork Coalition, Trout Unlimited, Watershed Restoration Coalition, the tribes, our state and federal agency partners, and as well as city and county government. So now we'll dig into the aquatics update. I'm going to start first to talk about where we work on aquatic restoration projects. And essentially, in close collaboration with Fish, Wildlife, and Parks, we prioritize different watersheds into what we call priority 1 and 2. And those are essentially areas within the Upper Clark Fork River Basin where we can spend our aquatic restoration funds. I see Bill squinting over there. Is there a particular watershed you're looking at?
It's just my eyes
are. I'm getting there. And our restoration goals, our aquatic restoration goals, are to restore the main stem trout fishery by improving recruitment from the tributaries. Second one is to replace lost trout angling in the main stem by improving populations in the tributaries. And the third is to maintain or improve native trout populations in the basin to preserve rare and diverse gene pools and improve diversity and resiliency. And to achieve these goals, we have quite a few tools in our toolbox. One of the main tools that we use is flow augmentation, trying to get more cold, clean water into these streams. We also do a lot of fish entrainment reduction projects. Those are centered around trying to keep fish out of irrigation canals by building fish screens like this one in the middle of the screen here. It's called a corrugated water fish screen. We also work on fish passage improvements in general, so making irrigation diversions and other structures more passable for fish. We work to enhance and protect riparian habitats as well as in-stream fish habitat. I'm going to shift over to flow augmentation because that really is one of the better tools in our toolbox. And it has a little bit more specific prioritization scheme in terms of where we focus those efforts. The highest priority area for flow augmentation is the Clark Fork River between Galen and Deer Lodge. Second in priority are all other priority 1 and 2 tributaries that are outside of the main injured area. And third in priority are projects that are priority 2 that are outside the injured areas. And as these projects are implemented over time, along with our partners, we monitor sort of the benefits of those projects to these priority areas. And one simple way that we do that is just to simply look at USGS stream gauge data. So here's a couple of stream gauge graphs right off the USGS website The one on your left here is from Clark Fork near Galen. So you're looking at CFS flow on the y-axis over the past year. And the solid blue line is our minimum flow target at Galen of 40 CFS. And looking at the gauge, you can say, hey, we were above our minimum flow target at that particular site on the Clark Fork River most of last year. And that's despite the fact that this year is a pretty miserable flow year. We didn't get a lot of precip in the basin. And even though, along with our partners, we've implemented quite a few projects in this area, we'd like to take credit for meeting these flow targets. I will say that, this particular gauge is above most of the major irrigation withdrawals in the Clark Fork River. And if we look downstream at the Clark Fork at Deer Lodge, it paints a little bit different picture. Minimum flow targets were not being met, for much of July, August, and into September. It's not uncommon for that site. But I will say that, the picture might have been even worse had we not implemented some of these projects. For instance, in 2024 was the first year we had a split season lease with the Broken Circle Ranch. So these projects, little by little, can add up to a lot of benefit, but it's clear we still have quite a bit of work to do to get more water into the river around Deer Lodge. I went through the flow stuff pretty quick. You can find more information on that program on our website on the Upper Clark Fork River Basin webpage, and you can look under documents and reports. So we're going to talk about a few non-flow projects. We don't have time to talk about all the projects we worked on last year, so we're just going to highlight some sort of high-profile fish passage projects in the Clark Fork River, as well as some in the Warm Springs watershed. Now, these projects as a whole have kind of got a lot of press over the last year. That isn't by accident. It's partially due to outreach by folks like Trout Unlimited, but it really does reflect the fact that these are large-scale basin-wide fish passage enhancement projects. We're really trying to restore a basin here and not just, little bits and pieces of creeks here and there. This is really a coordinated and targeted effort, and it's been recognized, nationwide at this point. So for the main stem, there's 7 diversions that we've been looking at. 2 of those have already been improved for fish passage. One of them, the Sager Lane project, which I'll chat about in a slide or 2 here, is under construction this fall. It's wrapping up, and we have 4 more that are in development. And our primary partners on these projects are Trout Unlimited, Clark Fork Coalition, and Fish, Wildlife, and Parks. And TU and the coalition have been able to use the funds that we've allocated in the 2024 restoration plan, $750,000, and leverage that to go out and seek matching funds. So for instance, Trout Unlimited secured $1.3 million in various federal funding sources, and the coalition was able to get about $1 million in matching funds for these main stem projects. So focusing in on the Sager Lane project, again, that's the one that is under construction this fall. Just about a $550,000 project between the diversion improvements as well as the irrigation infrastructure improvements. Our partners brought in a match of a little over $200,000 to that project. And so this is a picture of what that Sager Lane diversion looked like before the improvements. It's a channel spanning pin and plank diversion, pretty common in Montana. But in this particular spot in low flows in the middle of summer, it's pretty rough for fish or recreationalists trying to move upstream or downstream over this thing. It looks better now. After the project, you can imagine a picture on the right is a lot more friendly for both fish and floaters. So the other passage projects we wanted to highlight were in the Warm Springs drainage. The goal of these projects were to provide passage for native bull trout past 3 diversions owned and operated by Butte Silverbow. These are diversions located in Warm Springs and its tributaries. These were completed this year and essentially reconnected 64 miles of high quality bull trout habitat. These bull trout move upstream to spawn in headwaters in the Warm Springs drainage. So these projects are allowing those fish to pass upstream to complete their life cycles. This project's been in development for quite a long time. There's a whole host of partners that contributed to this project, including Trout Unlimited, Fish, Wildlife and Parks, the Forest Service, Butte Silverbow, and a kind of Deer Lodge, as well as the Corps of Engineers. And in terms of cost share, TU was able to secure about $700,000 from the infrastructure bills, and Fish and Wildlife Service contributed about $50,000. So now that these sort of high priority passage projects have been completed in the basin, our attention's turning to the other priority passage issues in Warm Springs. Those are the Gardner and Warm Springs diversions in Lower Warm Springs Creek. And construction on those projects is anticipated to start in 2026. I'm going to shift gears here from talking about projects to talking about monitoring, sort of how we could or should be monitoring the effectiveness of our projects. Folks may be aware that according to Fish, Wildlife and Parks monitoring data, brown trout numbers in the Clark Fork River upstream of Deer Lodge are lower than they've been since FWP started monitoring them. So these charts that are up here are brown trout per mile, that's on the y-axis, over time at two different sites upstream of Deer Lodge that FWP has been sampling in recent years every year. And what we've seen in places like this pH shack section, which is on the left, was a peak in population of brown trout in 2013 of over 1,800 fish per mile. And since then it's declined, where in 2023, in FWP's population estimate, it was only 23 brown trout per mile. So that's a steep decline. And I can tell you, based on 2024 data, population still has not recovered. That declining trend is present in all of FWP's sampling sections upstream of Deer Lodge. So on the right, there's what's called the Sager Lane section. Similarly, population peaked in 2014 this time, declined and has not recovered. You contrast that to the trends that FWP has seen elsewhere downstream in the Clark Fork River. This chart on the left here is from Williams Taverner, which is down by Garrison. The brown trout population has been much more stable over time. And you may note in these charts, there's gray bars, which again are the brown trout population estimates, but there's also red bars, which are cutthroat trout, West Slope cutthroat trout. There is actually enough cutthroat in these parts of the Clark Fork for FWP to get population estimates on certain years. So this more stable trend that's present downstream, again, in another section called the phosphate section, is also seen in tributaries as well. So this decline, this sort of crash, is really unique to FWP's population data collected upstream of Deer Lodge only, and it's not present in either tributaries or downstream sections of the Clark Fork River. So what's going on? Well, we don't know, but it makes it difficult for us to monitor the benefits of all of our restoration efforts, as well as the remediation efforts going on in the Clark Fork River when the population has crashed for unknown reasons. So to investigate factors that are limiting the upper Clark Fork fishery, as part of the 2024 Aquatic and Terrestrial Restoration Plan revision, $1 million was allocated to look into this stuff. And since the revision and the allocation of these funds, we've done a lot of coordination with our partners to come up with a plan, and a draft plan and a budget. And the components of that plan are kind of three parts. And the main one is water quality. Clark Fork River has some known water quality issues. It may have some unknown water quality issues. And so we're coordinating closely with folks like USGS, EPA, DEQ, FWP, and Montana Tech, who already were doing pretty rigorous monitoring and research to sort of enhance that effort. We also have an MOU with FWP to enhance their research and monitoring on the fisheries. So in addition to their routine monitoring, they're also looking at doing some targeted research projects on brown trout reproduction and survival. And they're also in talks with MSU about doing a graduate project. And the third component is habitat and geomorphology. There's a lot of interest in habitat and how the cleanup efforts may be impacting that habitat and how that change in habitat could be impacting the fish. So we're working with Montana Tech on another graduate project to look at fish habitat and how it changes over time and space, as well as some of our contractors to dig in and get good quantitative data on the current state of fish habitat in the Clark Fork River. So there's no real lack of smart people doing good, rigorous monitoring and research in the Clark Fork River. We have a lot of good people we can and are working with, but the trick is, and the task that I'm tasked with is to try to put this all together and make sure that all these different efforts are complementing each other and enhancing each other and aren't just separate studies doing their own thing. So I think that's going to be the challenge going forward, is keeping these focused and as well as figuring out what are the unknowns, what are we not studying that we need to dig into. So that's when I come back and do this update next year, hopefully we'll have maybe a little more clear picture of what these limiting factors might be. And that's it for the aquatics. Are there any questions?
Christy Beal, do any of the trustees have questions?
I've got a couple here. Nathan, Bill Schenk for FWP. I'm going to take you back to the flow piece for just a second. Maybe more a comment than question, but it seems like every year we get notice from USGS that their contribution to the gauging program is going to be going down. And I'm just wondering if, those seem like very, very important gauges there on the Clark Fork, and if NRD's been involved in that conversation at all between other state agencies and of where to prioritize the gauges for federal funding, and also and how to step up partnership to make sure they stay there.
I can tell you where I've personally been involved is working with USGS as well as coordinating with DEQ and FWP to enhance the USGS gauging station in that reach between Deer Lodge and Warm Springs, where we've seen the fish decline. And we have a draft proposal we'll be submitting to EPA to enhance those that monitoring network, not just for flows, but to add things like temperature, conductivity, as well as look at other water quality parameters at those sites. So that proposal is going to go out to EPA, and hopefully they'll fund all of it or a portion of it. And that really was targeted to try to answer the reason behind the crash of the fishery. Okay. As for the discussions going on other gauging sites throughout the Clark Fork, I haven't been involved in those as much.
Then perhaps just a notice to the group that it's something we face year after year.
That was Bill Schenk speaking.
Yep.
This is Christy Beal speaking.
This is Sonia, DEQ. We would just echo that, and happy to try to partner. I know, outside of this, we've picked up the Smith River gauge funding for a couple years to try to keep that one going. So we've tried to look at other funding sources and creative solutions. So happy to work with the group.
This is Doug Martin with the Natural Resource Damage Program. We haven't funded USGS gauges specifically on the Clark Fork, but we've been involved with the previous investigation or the previous talks about funding. We have also worked with our partners to do additional flow monitoring and the Upper Clark Fork associated with the flow aspect to better delineate where the flow is needed and where our flow projects are having. So we are engaged in the flow, and we have been in those discussions in the past, but the USGS and EPA have always come forward and funded those gauges. So that's where we've been there. But yes, Bill, we do understand that there's probably a time when they will need to be additional funding.
This is Christy Beal. I have a few questions, but first I want to compliment the NRDP on the monitoring you guys are doing. I think that's a very important piece to make sure that we are using the funds that are available as, to the best of our abilities and in coordination. So I want to compliment you also on the coordination efforts so that the projects, each of the individual projects can be hopefully together taken and create a greater result than than if the projects were being conducted just in a vacuum. But I do have some questions. Back to well, first, are there any projects where the monitoring that you are doing indicates a question as to whether a specific project that's been funded is showing the efficacy we expected it to?
Yes. So sort of separate but related to, this main stem monitoring and this fish decline, FWP, through our MOU with NRD, has done a lot of monitoring of the efficacy of our restoration projects throughout the basin. And that's included simple things as population estimates over time, pre and post, tagging fish and seeing how their movement might be enhanced by building fish screens. So there's been a lot of effort towards that. And we and FWP can't monitor every project. So we really try to prioritize sort of high profile projects. And one of those, for instance, is a fish screen on Flint Creek called the Allendale fish screen, which is actually 4 different fish screens on one site, $3 million project. And FWP has been working since before that project was initiated to sort of get baseline data and then now post data to figure out how that project is benefiting not only Flint Creek, but they're seeing fish, cutthroat trout, move from the Clark Fork River, go upstream in Flint Creek and be saved by that screen. So there's some cool examples of things like that. And there's a lot of, FWP did a great job of getting a lot of baseline data throughout the basin, where we can go back in the future and look at the effects on these streams over time.
Is there any specific area, this is Christy Beal, I'm sorry. Is there any specific area where monitoring is being done where there really is a question, like is this project that we're funding, is it doing anything? Is it helping? Is it hurting? Is it doing anything?
Well, I think there's some general questions about the fish entrainment enhancement and building fish screens. What kind of benefit does that have? It has obvious visual benefits. There were fish in this ditch last year. Now we built a screen, now there's not. What does that mean to the population? What does that mean to the population of this creek? What does it mean to the population downstream in the Clark Fork River, where we're ultimately trying to get fish? And that's this sort of ongoing debate and ongoing conversation. And if you you have a fish screen in one spot, but the next ditch downstream's not screened, are you benefiting? And so that's where these tagging studies that FWP's been doing can help inform some of that. And our approach generally when it comes to screening is try to hit every major diversion we can, and that will cumulatively result in more fish in that creek. And we've seen that with some of the tagging data from FWP.
Christy Beal again, and I'm sorry, I have a few questions. So if somebody else has them, interrupt me, please. I don't want to monopolize, but are there areas that, like you said, you can't monitor every project? Are there areas that are not, or projects that are not being monitored that NRDP feels like we really need to find a way to get that particular project monitored for any reason?
I'm probably not the best person to ask that, because I've been kind of helping to direct those efforts, and I hope that I've done a good job of it. I've been working on it for 10 years now. And so, working with FWP and the fish biologists, I think we have a pretty good understanding of where to where to put our effort. You could always do more. And I know that staffing is an issue at FWP. They have jobs beyond just monitoring NRD restoration projects. And those guys do a ton of work in helping us with that effort. So I think they're doing a good job.
Great. Did you have something, Doug?
This is Doug Martin. The only thing I would add to that, Christy, is in our monitoring plan that we do have, that is where we have Fish, Wildlife and Parks helping us implement that. There are various watersheds that get monitored at various time periods. So, and Nathan knows it better than I do, but not every watershed gets monitored, every single year. So some of the watersheds where we have projects going on, we may not monitor them for 2 to 3 years. So there is a data gap there, but most of the watersheds that we are monitoring or that we have done projects in do get a certain level of monitoring. So we don't have that data every year. Is your question a valid one? Are there projects out there that we're not seeing an impact to? There probably are, but the fact that we can't monitor the effectiveness of every project, that is a data gap. Part of also we call it the where's the fish monitoring that Nathan's working on of, what's happening to the fish, is looking at whether or not the work that we're doing in the tributaries. Back in 2012, we thought working with Fish, Wildlife and Parks and identifying these tributaries, that was the best way to get the population of the trout in the main stem back to a normal or to a baseline condition. Part of the where's the fish question is that the right thing to do? Or should we be moving this money or the funding that we have to a higher priority project or something that's going to help us address the fish project? So, I think in the next couple of years, we'll have a better answer to some of those questions.
Christy Beal, another question I have. It looked like when you had the bar charts up about the flow, there was a specific year that it looked like things seemed to start to really go downhill. Was it 2013?
These graphs or the?
Yes.
Okay.
Was it?
Yeah, 2013, 2014 were pretty good population wise, and we attribute that to good flow years in 2010, 2011. There's kind of this lag after good flow years. You tend to get a bump in the population, and that's a relationship we saw for quite a long time. But that we've had some good flow years since then, and the population has not bounced back. So something else is driving those swings.
Christy Beal, do we know what happened? I mean, is there, I get it that it might be speculation at this point, but we're not really into speculating here. I get that too. But are there events or situations that preceded that 2013, 2014, 2015 time range that we think might have contributed to this?
Well, like I said, the good flow years, we attributed some of the high numbers based on that, but we don't know what caused the crash, but we talk a lot about what has changed since that time period, since 2013, 2014. And so it coincides with some pretty big changes in water quality. For instance, Butte upgraded their wastewater treatment plant in 2016. That presumably improved water quality, but it was a big change in the amount of nutrients coming downstream from Butte. Warm Springs ponds, the way they've treated water there is constantly evolving. They've changed the amount of lime that they add, for instance, over that time period. The other thing that started in the Clark Fork River, well, in 2014, the first phase of remediation was completed. So that, had big changes in the, amount of metals in the floodplain and the banks, but it also altered fish habitat. And so it's, like I said, we don't know what the cause is and we don't know what the smoking gun is, but there's a lot of potentials out there. And the idea is to try to dial that in.
That Christy Beal again, I'm sorry. In that coordination of efforts web slide that you had, first again, I want to say I appreciate you guys coordinating on that. What do you need that would help you complement that coordination and even promote the efficiency of it and the effect of it, that coordination? More hours in the day?
Yeah, and not just for me, but for as the person trying to coordinate, but all the people I'm coordinating with, they're also busy with their own lives trying to put a meeting together. And we've had so many meetings. It's difficult at times. But it's amazing, you know, the Clark Fork River monitoring research community is large and dedicated, and they're willing to give their time and work on this stuff and help. And it's kind of remarkable that people are coming together to try to solve this problem. But in terms of coordinating those people, I need an expert on everything. I need an expert on water quality and fisheries and bugs and climate. And
This is Christy Beal. I just want to encourage you. I know it's hard to add that coordination of efforts into everyone's day, but I want to encourage people to keep doing that, because if everybody's looking individually for the answers, I think it's going to take longer and more money to get there than if everybody is coordinating and collaborating to the extent they can to get to those answers.
if I could just say one more thing about that, and Doug's been a big part of this too. We've made this coordinated effort for the last, when did we start the Upper Clark Fork Working Group, Doug? When did we start the Upper Clark Fork Working Group?
Nathan asked when we started the Upper Clark Fork River Working Group. This is Doug Martin. That was started actually 2019, 2020, right at the start of the COVID timeframe.
Sorry, whoever has their phone on and we're listening to it, can you please turn it off? Is there someone online that has their phone on?
Anyway, it was just my point that we've been working on that coordination piece for many years now, because there is so much research and so many graduate projects and monitoring going on. I'll give Doug a lot of credit to have the foresight to try to put us all together and start that coordination, years ago. So I'm just trying to take that ball and run with it.
Any more questions?
This is Elizabeth Erickson. Nathan, I had a question. I know when I was reviewing the report, there was a little description in there of that otolith study that was done that talked about, and you'll have to forgive me on the numbers. I don't have them at the tip of my tongue here, but it seemed like the first time that was done, it looked like most of the fish were actually coming from the actual Upper Clark Fork itself, and then some lesser amount in the tribs, and then that turned around when the study was redone. And I wondered if you had any insight into why we're seeing now the majority of the fish coming from the tribs instead of from the main stem.
Your recollection is right. The story's right there. Whereas we did a study where we were able to look at the chemistry in fish ear bones called otoliths and be able to assign them and know where they respond and reared. And we did that in 2016, 2017, and then we repeated that again in 22, 23 and compared the different sources and sort of coarsely main stem versus tributary. And in the original study, 16, 17, the majority of the fish still came from the tributaries, but it was about 36% of the fish came from the main stem in this particular reach where we've seen this crash. When we repeated the study, it was down to 8%. So we really lost we really lost that main stem source of recruitment. It's a pretty dramatic change. It's not as dramatic as going from 1,800 fish per mile to 23 fish per mile. So the magnitude of that change, that 36% to 8%, can explain that magnitude of a decline. And the average, if we average these over time, it's about, it depends on how far back you look, it's anywhere from 600 to 900 fish per mile. So what the otolith study tells me is that we have a main stem problem. We have a problem that is impacting fish in the main stem primarily, but it's also impacting our tributary outmigrants. It's, for lack of a better word, is probably killing them too. So we need both of those things to be happening to get these kind of super low fish numbers. Does that make sense?
So Elizabeth Erickson again. So if I'm understanding you, the crash happened both in the tribs and the main stem, but maybe more critically in the main stem.
Exactly.
Okay.
You put that better than I did. Thank you.
Christy Beal, are there any additional questions from the trustees? And I don't have input, right? I don't have input from the Upper Clark Fork River Basin other than that, which I've already provided. Any public questions or comments?
Christy, one more question from Elizabeth Erickson. I know we had, I think Nathan, you came and spoke to the BNRC probably a year or so ago, and a question came up in the audience actually of the PKD disease, that the kidney disease, which I'm not a biologist, not my area of expertise, but I wondered if any work was being done to investigate that. It seemed like an interesting thing to look at as far as reasons for the fish crash.
Yeah, I don't want to get out over my skis and speak too much for FWP, but they are looking into disease, and there's a lot of that effort is focusing in on the other side of the divide in Region 3, where there's also been a decline, not quite to this magnitude, but also with brown trout. And I know that FWP is kind of coordinating those efforts. They've done a lot of effort to get some disease specialists on board to be able to look at that stuff, because there was a time when there wasn't the staff in Montana to be able to address those questions. So we're set up to be able to look at that sort of stuff now, and I think it's going to happen in coordination to what's going on, in Region 3.
Thanks.
Christy Beal, is there any question or comment from the public? Anybody online? Okay. Okay. All right. Doug's going to finish up with the terrestrial portion of the update. Thank you, Nathan.
It's the Doug Martin with the Natural Resource Damage Program. I'm going to go through the update for the terrestrial and recreation components. Ray Vinke, our project manager for the terrestrial, is off chasing terrestrial critters this week. So similar to the aquatic prioritization, we did go work with Fish, Wildlife, and Parks and prioritize the terrestrial habitats within the Upper Clark Fork Basin and identified key areas, landscape areas where to do work. The main goals or the main actions that we take in these areas, land acquisitions or conservation easements, trying to preserve those high quality habitats. Where we have transitioned to more now these days is looking at habitat enhancements, trying to improve the habitats within the upper basin to maintain the quality or improve the quality of the terrestrial habitats. This is a map that shows all the places that we have worked on habitat enhancement projects in the basin since 2012. The one project that we're describing here is the Hollenbeck project. That's all the way up at the top in purple, just to the right of Drummond. This was a cooperative project that we worked on with not only the landowner, but also with the NRCS. We worked on 4 water developments, trying to move the cattle off the riparian zone and spread the cattle out. And also worked on developing and protecting those riparian areas themselves. In addition to this, we're going to continue working on this property with DNRC and the NRCS as well on doing some conifer encroachment projects. That seems to be the big movement these days, is to work on removing conifers from habitats where normally they would have been removed by wildfire or something, some other natural mechanism. One of the other projects in the terrestrial box that we work on is the Clark Fork River Ranch. This is a ranch along the Clark Fork River, about 5 miles of that we do manage. We do have a management plan that we work on specifically to help us monitor the site and operate this. In 2023, Fish, Wildlife, and Parks data for the block management areas is a year behind. There was almost 500, a little over 560 days, 100 days of people using this ranch, which is good. That's one of the things that we did purchase it for. In addition to that, we are working with the local landowners on the flow side of things. We have an agreement with the local landowner there to use the pivots on this ranch early season and then shut off all the water to the Valentin ditch, so that water goes in stream during the time of year that Nathan talked about, when the flows are lowest in the Clark Fork River. And we are, one of the other things that we are doing here, we do monitor this because that we are shutting off those pivots in the late season. We are monitoring this to see what effects that does have on the vegetation. It's something that the flow working group is very interested in. The ranchers are very interested in the results of that data to see what happens when you do shut off your irrigation and are not irrigating your alfalfa. Some of the other land acquisitions that we do have, or conservation easements that we do have in the Upper Basin, most of our land acquisitions have transferred to Fish, Wildlife, and Parks for operations. They take care of those. We are highlighting the conservation easements up here because we do get, most of these or actually all of these are in the block management program. So we do get some data back on whether or not they're getting used. And in this case, of all the conservation easements, a little over or close to 13,000 acres. There's just under 4,000 user days from 2023 from the block management program. So that's successful. And we do participate with the land trusts that operate these conservation easements to ensure that they are in compliance. On the recreation side, there's a total of 8 recreation projects in the restoration plan. To date, 4 of those have been completed. The ones that have not been completed, there's still money allocated to the Milltown State Park. Fish, Wildlife, and Parks continues to manage and monitor the park and develop different aspects of that as they move forward. On the fishing access sites, Fish, Wildlife, and Parks is also implementing this program for us. We have an MOU for that. They are currently developing 2 fishing access sites downstream, or excuse me, downstream of Deer Lodge, north of Deer Lodge. You get that turned around all the time, north of Deer Lodge. And with the hopes of trying to get these implemented in next year. The Greenway Service District Trail, this is a trail that was added to the Upper Clark Fork River Basin Restoration Plan in 2024. There was no construction in 2024. The Greenway Service District does continue to work on planning and the design of the trail through the Durant Canyon section. This is a section where it's actually, we walked it with our advisory council this summer. It's a very nice section of the trail, but it's also very close to the railroad. And that's the biggest thing that's holding up implementation of this section is coordination or negotiations with the railroad here. The Powell County multi-county trail that was also added to the restoration plan in 2024 One of the requirements for them, or that they had in their grant, was they had there's all matching funds on recreation projects. They had a grant submitted that would have funded more than their match requirement. That grant did not fall through, or excuse me, that grant fell through. They did not get obligated any money. They have coordinated or communicated with us that they are seeking additional grant funds. And once they get those, they will come forward for a contract on that. So with that, I'll take any questions on the terrestrial and recreation projects.
Christy Beal, any questions from the trustees? I do not have any comments or questions from the Upper Clark Fork Advisory Council. Any?
I've got one.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't. Right
I'm
there.
out of your visual. This is Elizabeth Erickson. Doug, quick question for you on the Greenway. I just wondered what the nature of the negotiations with the railroad are to get what are they looking for to finish the trail through Durant Canyon?
This is Doug Martin. Elizabeth, I don't know exactly, but I do know that there's the proximity to the rail line, and that is an issue. There's places where the trail, because of the narrowness of the Durant Canyon, or the fact that the railroad goes from one side to the other, they are either crossing it or very close to the train tracks, and that is the issue. That the railroad wants space. They don't want people recreating right next to their line.
So they're looking for access control then. A lot fencing? You don't really know?
I don't know exactly. I know when we did our tour this summer that they did talk about fencing, you know, and there's other institutional controls that need to be in place. I also know that, having dealt with the railroad in other situations, even if you have those institutional controls in place, they're not, they want more. So we don't know the exact nature of all of the negotiations, but it is the proximity to the rail line that's the biggest concern.
Any other questions from the trustees? If not, we'll open it to questions from the public. Any online? Apologize, this is Christy Beal. All right. I believe that wraps up the terrestrial and recreational portion then. And so the next part that the next piece we're gonna talk about is the Blacktail Creek project overview, and Doug, you'll be starting with that. Thank you.
Yes, this is Doug Martin again. So there is one project in the Upper Clark Fork that we've been developing over quite some time that has come up this year, and some issues with it, and we're bringing that to everybody's attention because that has been elevated. So this is a project on Blacktail Creek. Blacktail Creek flows south out of Butte. It is a priority watershed within the Upper Clark Fork River Basin, identified by Fish, Wildlife, and Parks. The actions that we are looking to implement in this watershed are fish passage, fish entrainment, water quantity, riparian habitat, and in-stream habitat. And the priority is in that order, 1 to 5 there. The components of this project, they're located on the Butte Country Club as well as on Butte Silverbow property just south of the Country Club. And there are two components that were permitted as one. One is the working with a sewer line that is owned by Butte Silverbow, and the other is working on the diversion and irrigation pond on Butte Country Club property. So starting on the south side, this is the sewer line project that's on Butte Silverbow property. You can see the picture on the left shows the golf course, and this is just off that on Blacktail Creek itself. The picture on the right shows, you can see that square concrete structure there. That is the sewer line that is encased in concrete, or a sewer line that is encased in that square concrete there. That was once buried under Blacktail Creek, but as Blacktail Creek has incised over time or lowered its elevation, this sewer line has now become a fish passage barrier, both upstream and downstream. Fish, Wildlife and Parks has monitored fish sitting above this screen, waiting for flows to get high enough for them to get over this and move downstream. So the project is addressing this issue, and the construction cost here is approximately $75,000. The other project, the irrigation pond project, is actually located within the golf course itself. This is a schematic of what it looks like today. Blacktail Creek is flowing from left to right on this picture. It flows down past the pond, and like many irrigation projects, the golf course puts up planks across Blacktail Creek and routes water directly into this pond. They use this pond for their irrigation. So they have a pump in that pond where they're pumping the water out to irrigate their property. And Butte Silver Country Club does have a water right for that diversion. The first part of this project is looking at putting in a new diversion further upstream and putting a fish screen on that diversion to stop entrainment into the pond, as well as putting some structure there so that we can maintain fish passage at that diversion. This costs approximately $200,000. The larger part of the project is actually rebuilding and reconstructing the irrigation pond itself, pulling it off of the stream slightly. So there's some separation there, and then isolating it from the stream. So this pond is no longer directly connected to the Blacktail Creek itself. It's connected by the diversion structure that it will be diverting water into it. There's some additional work associated with recontouring and working on the floodplain associated where the pond was. So this part of the project moves the pond offstream, creates some floodplain habitat, as well as reduces fish habitat within the pond. The fish within the pond was a brook trout fishery, and FWP would like to reduce that type of fish in Silverboat Creek. So in summary, the Blacktail Creek watershed. So in the restoration plan, we have allocated funds to the priority watersheds within the Upper Clark Fork River Basin. And within those watersheds, we have prioritized projects with Fish, Wildlife and Parks and our other partners to work on the highest priority projects first. And we have worked on several high priority projects within Blacktail Creek. This was identified as a priority project, and the project we are currently working on, we consider as a priority project. But the problem is that we only have in this watershed about $540,000 remaining in this allocation after working on the other projects. The cost of this project is approximately $750,000. And we do know that there is additional funding needed to finalize or actually to do construction management, as well as work on the floodplain permitting commitments that are required post-project. So the total project cost is around $900,000. So in this instance, we have a shortfall of $360,000. In the restoration plan also in 2012, we recognized that, and I know this is small, but we're putting this up here to show that we actually thought about this in 2012. There was a line item that we put in for a contingency. We knew that all of these watersheds that we allocated funding to, they had conceptual projects, and with each of those conceptual projects was a conceptual budget. So we didn't know exactly how much each project was going to cost or how much each watershed was going to need. So we put money into a contingency to ensure that if a project got to a certain point and that watershed was out of money, we could allocate some funding to that. We started out, this contingency initially had $2 million in it. I want to say in 2018, we actually moved $500,000 out of the contingency because we were not using it that much. And we wanted to put those funds to a watershed where we had actually used them. We have used it in the past, and we are at about $1.3 million in the contingency right now. but our past use has been premised on a policy of 10% of the watershed allocation. If it was going to be more than 10% of that watershed allocation, we were going to seek advisory council recommendation and trustee approval to do that. And in this case, the $360,000 that is needed to finish this project is well above that 10%. It's approximately 31% of the Blacktail Creek total watershed allocation of $1.2 million. So what we did is in October, we met with the advisory council and we presented this to them. The advisory council listened to the discussion. They came up with a motion that the council and NRDP will assist and work with the parties involved to raise sufficient funds to complete this project and report back to the council in the spring of 2025. Spring of 2025 is important because this project is a winter construction project because it is on the golf course, or a portion of it is, so that it doesn't disturb that activity. So what we have worked on so far is we have worked on submitting an application to the 319 program. We're also working on submitting a future fishery grant, as well as we've been talking with the Butte Council about potential use of some of their funds. There are other grants out there and partners that we are discussing and trying to gather or get as much money as we can to work on this project and try to lower it to the point where if we do need to go to the Upper Clark Fork River contingency, it does meet that criteria of 10%. So that's where we are on this project. We did want to bring this to your attention that we are working on this because the use of the contingency has come up as a concern to some. And so questions for this?
Do any of the trustees have questions? Hearing none, I'll move to the Upper Clark Fork River Basin's Advisory Council input. Doug explained, I think, quite a bit about summarized why the council took the position we did. We had concerned over the timing of the request for this money. We had already gone through the funding process, and the request for this money came after that. We didn't want to set a precedent of just come to us whenever you need money and we'll figure it out. That's not how the process works. The other concern we had was that there was no matching brought with the request. And that's something that the Upper Clark Fork River Basin Advisory Council has been pretty stringent in asking people to bring matching funds to help preserve the funding that is available. And then the final thing was the contingency fund has never been used at this level before. And there was no precedent for us to go out there and do that. And we just didn't feel like, especially given the other concerns and some of the perceptions that may surround that particular project, that this was the right time to go way outside that precedent. The funding, certainly there would be a clear benefit for fish habitat and to the watershed, but the perception that there would also be benefit to a private country club wasn't lost on the council. When you overlay that with the timing of the request, the lack of the matching, and the requirement that we would have to go way outside the precedent for using the contingency, we just didn't feel like it was something we were comfortable with funding. So I appreciate, Doug, you guys' efforts to get those additional funding sources if there are some available. Okay. Are there any public questions with respect to the Blacktail Creek? None online? Okay.
I have a comment.
Could you please state your name for us?
My name's John Sesso. I am a member of the BNRC on the Butte Council, a longtime participant in the NRD program through my role at Butte Silver Bow. And I just want to clarify a couple things for the trustee council, just so you're fully aware. First of all, the project was started, more than 5 years ago, and has been moving along as best it can. But a substantial number of dollars have been spent to design and secure permits on this project, some $280,000 already. And that's a substantial portion of the Blacktail Creek allocation that has already been spent on this project to get it ready to bid. Secondly, I just want to make it clear that this project was born and conceived as a project to improve Blacktail Creek and the fisheries and fish habitat in Blacktail Creek. It was not proposed or conceived by the Butte Country Club, but specifically and directionally as a restoration project on Blacktail Creek. And the Country Club agreed to participate in it, and has been cooperating throughout the last 5-6 years to try to get this project done. As part of that project, the Country Club had to go through a pretty serious and substantial water right change authorization process with respect to the new diversion structure. And that will change if we move forward with this project, and my sincere hope that we do, that will change and modify the Country Club's water right to be considerably less than the current water right as it is posted with the DNRC. So there was a substantial role that the Country Club played that was at their risk in doing this project, and that should not be lost in the whole business of how to get this project done. Thirdly, I want to make it clear that the Country Club was never advised by NRD that we should have been participating in any matching requirement. The matching requirement, which I don't think is a good idea, but that's been more of a more recent, last couple years thing that's come through the process. And when this project got started, it was not. And so we were kind of flat-footed when there was a deficiency in the funding and the expectation that we had to provide some matching requirement. And we have spent quite a bit of money as a staff in participating in this project. Like I said, we reviewed and agreed to the water right change. Really, that may ultimately not be in our interest, but in the interest of the fish and in the interest of the project, we decided to go forward with that. And we continue to pledge to do our part to get this project done. So I would hope that we get a couple of these matching grants that are listed on the screen share here, and if we are short, we would hope that the 10% rule and whatever rules are applied relative to the contingency plan could also be used to make up the difference. But I also would say that we were not advised prior to the Aquatic and Terrestrial plan amendments last fall, the fall of 23, that this was an issue. I certainly would have been an advocate for increasing the amount of money that was allocated to the Blacktail Creek restoration projects in 2012. It's fairly common sense that the projects we had in mind to complete then would cost more, 12 years later. And, we should have we should have made an additional allocation to cover the projects that were already in process and nearly ready to be constructed. So I just make those comments. I hope that come spring of 2025, the matching funds will be there, including some that may be available through the contingency fund, and we can get this project done. It would be a real shame to have invested so much so far in the last 5 years to make this project a reality, and then not go forward with it and see that sizable investment, nearly 300,000, essentially be wasted. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. And again, this is Christy Beal, and I'm speaking now as a member of the Advisory Council. I believe that I speak for the Advisory Council when I say that I don't think anybody questioned whether it would be a valuable project. And so I just wanted to leave it at that, and I hope that everything can work out, and we can get it where it needs to be in the spring. Any additional public questions or comments? Okay, Mr. Stark?
Yeah, this is Chris Stark with CSK team. I'm wondering, downstream of this project, what sort of barriers are there left that need to be addressed before this could actually be something useful to migration of fish?
This is Doug Martin of the Natural Resource Damage Program. Chris, this on Blacktail Creek, this is in the watershed before it gets into what a lot of us call the Butte Priority Soils Operable Unit. This is the last barrier from there down through Silverbow Creek down to the fish barrier that was constructed by Fish, Wildlife and Parks back in 2013. That is the only, this is the last barrier on Silverbow Creek. Before that barrier, which is in Durant Canyon before Warm Springs Ponds.
Are there any other questions or comments from the public? Or from the trustees?
Yes, this is Elizabeth Erickson. Just a question as to what's the major benefit to the Butte Country Club for this project? It seems like it's a stream project.
This is Doug Martin, Elizabeth. It is a stream project. This is a project much like the other irrigation projects that we work on with landowners throughout the upper basin, where we're working on a diversion for them to try to improve fish passage, either upstream or downstream, reduce fish entrainment. So there are benefits to the landowner in a lot of those cases where they would have to go out and put up their planks, their pin and planks or tarps in the stream. You know, the diversion now will create that for them or maintain that for them, so they don't have to do that. So it's similar to that type of a project. The diversion will divert water into the pond. They will no longer have to block the stream off. The benefit to the resource is that there will be fish passage and the stream will flow directly by the irrigation pond instead of being routed into the irrigation pond, then back out.
So the major benefit then is just to managing their diversion. It makes it easier to manage their diversion. Is that?
That's my understanding. I'm kind of looking at Jim Ford in the back and he's nodding his head. So yes, it is a management issue for them, and also the design of it was designed to function with their new irrigation system that they put in. So.
Jim Ford.
Jim, can you walk up and talk into the mic, please?
There's the other big benefit is, the area is sort of geomorphically unstable, and that's why it's head cut all the way back up to where the sewer line is. That's generated a lot of sediment, in-stream sediment. So our reconstruction, because we're not really pulling the pond off the creek, we're really routing the creek around where the pond is, and we're expanding it a little bit. But we're reconstructing that whole floodplain in there. the stream banks, the stream channel, all of that to have it a more stable system. So I think there's that advantage to the golf course because they struggle with this instability with flooding of fairways and stuff. I mean, I'm not a golfer, so I can't say how it affects play, but that's one of the other, I think, the other distinct advantages.
Christy Beal, are there any additional questions or comments from the public? All right, thank you. Let's move next to the discussion on the Parrot Tailings Waste Removal Project.
Yes, Doug Martin, I will present this as well. So the Parrot project that was recently completed, the Parrot Tailings Waste Removal Project, there was this flow diagram that you see up here. That's quite confusing, but there's 4 things you need to look at. The blue boxes are the various funds where the money came from for the Parrot project, and those include the Upper Clark Fork River Basin Aquatic and Terrestrial pot, the Butte, the Upper Clark Fork River Basin Butte groundwater fund, and the Butte Area 1 fund. So those are the 3 funds that contributed money to the Parrot, and the Parrot's the green circle. This flow chart provides also with some written text of a way the money flows to the Parrot, but then once the Parrot is done, how that money flows back. It is time to move some of the money back. The Parrot is complete. We do feel we're in compliance with the consent decree and the issues associated with that. So by the end of the year, we hope to come to a final number on what is left in the Parrot and what can be returned to those various funds that contributed to the successful Parrot project. So at this time, there's about $2.8 million in the Parrot fund. We do feel that we need to retain a minimum or approximately $500,000 for some operations and some monitoring of the project itself. This is a conservative number. We don't want to have to come back and ask for more for this, so some more may come back later. By retaining that $500,000, that would leave about $2.4 million to reimburse. Per that chart, 14% of this money would go back to the Upper Clark Fork River Basin Butte groundwater allocation, which would be a little over $300,000. 51% would go back to the Upper Clark Fork River Basin Aquatic and Terrestrial. That would be about $1.2 million. And in the 2024 revision to the Aquatic and Terrestrial Restoration Plan, those funds were allocated. So we would allocate that money per the 2024 amendment or the 2024 updated plan, where the first $500,000 would go to ecological restoration along Silverbow Creek. The remaining money, that $700,000, would be divided. 80% would go to the Greenway Trail, 10% would go to Browns Gulch, and the remaining 10% would go to Warren Springs Creek. The one thing of note here for on the Greenway Trail was allocated $2.5 million in the 2024 plan. What the plan noted is that if enough money did not come back from the Parrot, the staff would make a recommendation to the trustee of where that money could come from to fully fund the Greenway Service District. So we are about $2 million short on that. At the time when we do this transfer, we'll make a recommendation that the best place to get this money would come from unallocated interest. There's interest that Miranda talked about in her financial statement that has accrued that should be able to fund the Greenway Service District in the construction of the 2 trail segments that they proposed. The money going back to the Butte Area 1 Restoration Fund. So once again, there's $2.8 million. We retained the $500,000. The Butte Area 1 Restoration Plan gets approximately 35% or approximately $825,000. In per the 2020 Butte Area 1 Restoration Amendment, the council there recommended how to allocate the funding coming back from the Parrot. And 30% of that would go to Silverbow Creek, 15% to the waste improvements, or basically revegetation component, 35% to stream restoration, and 20% to recreation. And we are going to show this graph of how this, or a table of how this works with Butte Area 1 when Pat talks a little bit about that on the next agenda item. So are there any questions on the Parrot reimbursement?
Yeah, Doug, Bill Schrenk here. I'm just trying to, in my mind, piece through those various categories and want to know if there's a link between that return of funds and the Blacktail Creek project, and whether Blacktail qualifies under anything such as the Butte Area 1 stream aquatics.
So so Blacktail Creek is within the is currently funded within the Upper Clark Fork River Basin Aquatic and Terrestrial Plan.
Okay.
And as Mr. Sesso noted, in 2024, we did not allocate additional funding to Blacktail Creek. That was something that I would say we all missed during the public process and our planning process. As far as the Butte Area 1, there is a potential that, and it's something that Pat is going to talk about in the next segment, there is a potential that some funding could come from Butte Area 1, and I did note that on the potential funding sources. But that's something that the Butte Council would have to recommend to the trustee as well.
Are there any other questions from any of the trustees? I have no further input for the advisory council. Elizabeth, do you? All right. Then hearing none, we'll move on to well, we don't have it on here, but are there any public questions or comments regarding the Parrot tailings waste removal?
Madam Chair,
Yes.
this is John Sesso again. I have a question for Doug. Doug, when the completion of the project was declared a couple of years ago, it was announced that there was between $5 and $7 million surplus from all the funding sources that you showed on the master chart. And now, after a couple of years, while we thought the project was complete, the number is down to 2.8. Could you just give the trustees an update on where that extra $2.5–3 million went in that time period?
Madam Chair, yes, John, I can. So the Parrot project had three major components to it. It had the Butte Silverbow shop component, which was approximately $14 million, and that came in on budget. It had the Parrot tailings removal itself, and that came in on budget. Actually, there was $5 million below budget there. The big outlier that we did not plan for when we were allocating funding to the Parrot project, because we did not know it at the time, it came up in the consent decree, was we call it the Parrot monitoring program that needed to be done. There were certain requirements within the consent decree that required the state to monitor the Parrot project to ensure that it did not impact remedial activities, Atlantic Richfield's activities downstream. We were potentially liable for impacts to their activities. So to answer your question, John, most of that money between and I know you're talking about the commencement or the little gathering we had at the Civic Center, And between then and now, so the Parrot monitoring has reduced the amount of money left. In addition to that, Jim Ford is putting together a list of those expenses, but if you look at the expenses on the Parrot chart, there were a large number of expenses at the end of the project. One of those was a change to do additional tailings removal and additional paving in the Civic Center area to remove more contamination. So there were a couple projects like that, but the big difference in the bottom line here is the additional monitoring that we had to do for the Parrot project. And as I said, I know you guys have asked for this for the BNRC, and we will have a table and some more information on that at that time.
This is Christy Beal. Are there any additional questions or comments on the Parrot Tailings Waste Removal Project reimbursement? Okay, let's move to the Butte Area 1 Restoration Plan update, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My name is Pat Cunneen. I work as an environmental science specialist out of the Butte NRDP office. Just briefly, Butte Area 1 is basically ground zero for the injury to the Upper Clark Fork River Basin. The ore was mined off the Butte Hill and brought down to the Silverbow Creek corridor, where there are approximately a dozen milling and smelting operations along the creek in Butte Area 1. And the lawsuit, the settlement between the state and the Montana was for $28 million, and that was in 2008. At that time, Governor Schweitzer created the Butte Natural Resource Damage Restoration Council. It's a 9-member council. 6 were appointed by Butte Silverbow and 3 by the governor, and they've been meeting since 2010. And Elizabeth Erickson has served as the chairperson on that council since the beginning. And the first duty that we did was due diligence to find out the nature and extent of the injuries in Butte Area 1. And we spent almost $2 million doing investigations. And with that information, the council and the staff came up with the Butte Area 1 restoration plan. And since that time, we have been implementing that plan. And that money, the $28 million, by the time we got to work, had grown with interest to $32 million. And there are 5 categories in which those funds were broken into. And you see them here on this spreadsheet, and it's also in your packet. And the big hitters on this were the Parrot tailings removal, which is the first category. And that project is complete. And that basically has about $0 left in it. And the second one, the other big one, was the municipal water system improvements, and $10 million was dedicated to that category, and that went towards the construction of the Basin Creek Water Treatment Plant, and that came online in 2017. And there were about $750,000 left after that construction, and that actually went to rehabilitate the Basin Creek Dam, which takes the water into that treatment plant. So that category should be down to about 0. So there are basically 3 categories would still have money in it. Small projects has about 200,000, and those were ideas that we got from the public when we went out for comment with our plan. And the 2 that are left are recreation projects. One is for public fishing at the Molten Reservoir, which is approximately 6 miles north of Butte Silverbow, to replace the lost opportunities for fishing on Silverbow and Blacktail creeks, which were also a part of the lawsuit. And then another one to supply additional soils and plantings in a mine dump that was going to be turned into a BMX track. So those are the 2 projects we have left there. Recreation is was dedicated $1 million with interest. It's up to 1.3. That has never been touched. And one of the big projects that that the council wants to see and has been supported by Butte Silverbow and George Grant Trout Unlimited is to make the Basin Creek Reservoir area open to the public for fishing and water play. The other category with a large amount of money in it is stream restoration. And Blacktail Creek and Silverbow Creek run right through the heart of Butte Area 1. And there's basically $2 million in that category. And we are looking at a few different projects to work on the creek from Lexington Avenue in Butte back to Harrison Avenue. And that's a stream reach that is upstream of the DEQ project right now to remove the Blacktail Creek berm. And there's also another tributary that comes into this area called Grove Gulch. And we are looking at potentially doing a project on that area as well. The mine waste area re-veg, basically the Butte Hill has over 400 acres of reclaimed mine dumps, and those areas were planted with, at the time, the only commercial available grass seed mix was crested wheatgrass, which is not native to Montana. And part of the effort there has been to help return those reclaimed areas to a more native environment, supplying woody species and native forbs and bushes. And that category, there's basically $2 million left in that. And that is a shared responsibility between Butte Silver Bow and Montana Tech. And those projects are going very well. So those funds are committed. And we'll just move on to kind of what we're doing now. Okay. Sorry, I didn't forward to this slide previously, but this is basically the summary I just provided you. And really where we're at now in Butte is, so we started our work with restoration in 2012. The Butte Priority Soils Operable Unit, which is basically the greater Butte Hill and the area of Butte Area 1 is just a subset of that. And the record of decision came out in 2006, but we didn't get to a consent decree for the Butte Priority Soils Operable Unit until 2020. And now Remedy is just starting their work there. And Montana, through DEQ and NRDP, is a signatory to that consent decree. And part of our efforts have been to assure that we are getting what we signed up for. And so right now we are spending time monitoring the consent decree progress and making sure that we're getting the deal that we signed up for. So what we have been doing is spending staff time on that. We haven't really had a big project in the ground, so we are seeing expenses. And as Elizabeth Erickson alluded to earlier, we're seeing those funds spent on monitoring the consent decree. And we are trying to minimize those expenses. And we also are trying to make sure that we're not spending restoration funds on work that we believe Remedy should be doing. So if we do put the Butte Area 1 restoration plan on hold, what we would see is there would be no progress made towards the restoration programs or the projects that we have teed up. And the other thing, you know, we want to see, obviously we will gain interest, but as you all know, currently inflation is a big driver and costs are going up. It seems every year the program or the project that we had planned last year costs more this year, and it will probably cost more next year. So holding back on restoration is kind of a gamble because of inflation. And we are waiting for Remedy to do their job. And the consent decree was signed in 2020, and they're just now getting to the first project. And it's safe to say that Remedy probably won't be done for another decade in Butte. So The one thing that this council has is a great knowledge of the injury in Butte and what it would take to clean it up. And if we do hit pause, not only would our staff and our restoration council might not be around when we pick up the ball again, is that we'd lose that historic perspective and knowledge of what's going on in Butte. So those are kind of the pros and cons of potentially hitting pause for the Butte Area 1 restoration plan and waiting until remedy is done. But this is something that the BNRC wants to consider. And so what staff feels is that we should continue to do what we're doing and hopefully try and tee up the projects that we have. And the council did ask us to look at maybe 1 or 2 big projects. So we have a few alternatives in mind, and most of those alternatives would call for an amendment to the Butte Area 1 restoration plan. And that's a public process where we would have to go out for public comment, and eventually it would go to the trustee for his decision. But right now, that's kind of where we're at, is do we continue with what we've got, pick a few new alternatives, go out for an amendment, or hit pause and wait until remedy is complete? With that, I'll turn it back to you, Christy, for questions.
Excuse me, Christy Beal. Are there any questions and comments? Well, first from Elizabeth for the Butte.
You want me to go first?
Yes, yep, yes. Please.
All right, this is Elizabeth Erickson, BNRC Council Chair. Thanks, Pat, for going through all that. A lot of what he said is what I'm gonna say as well. Back up, I guess. For years, we've been saying in Butte that that we were worried that our restoration funds would not last until remediation was done, and we could see what kind of restoration is going to be necessary after the remediation is done. And now we're seeing that exact thing happen, where we've probably got another decade of remediation to go. But as you can see, our restoration funds are really getting used. And so what we've been doing is kind of trying to take a look at where we're at. I feel like the BNRC, the BAO fund, is sort of at a crossroads right now. Where we're at is that, you know, we've got limited funds in the pot right now, so to say, and some of that is getting expended for things that we're wondering if they should really come out of that fund, which we'll talk about in a minute. But the other part of it is that there are other funds that are out there that are that the remedy needs to get finished first, and then leftovers from those funds are slated to come back into the fund. The problem is that could be a long time down the road, and so as stewards of this fund, we're trying to figure out what is the best way to make it possible to have the most funds at the end to do restoration that we know is going to be needed in the basin at that time. So we're looking at this option where we either push pause, put the funds that we have now in the bank, and just hold on until remedy is done, and then look at what projects are then, or if we can continue on to develop a project now that uses the funds that we've got, and then at some later date, the rest of those funds come back. So those are kind of our two options that we've looked at. The problem is even if we hit pause, there's still expenditures coming out of the fund, which are probably going there. They will be going to admin and to these extra charges. So and I guess I should explain what those charges are. So one of the things that is coming out of the BAO fund is NRD's great work at CD compliance, and we appreciate the work that they're doing there. We think it's It's to the benefit of the Butte Basin, to the benefit of the state of Montana. However, we don't feel like the BAO restoration funds should be used to pay for NRD's attendance at these CD compliance meetings and reviewing documents and all of the work that goes in there. We really feel like that. Right now, DEQ is also doing some of that work. We feel that the state of Montana should speak with one voice, and that funding should be one, and it shouldn't come from restoration funds. So that's one piece of it. And that is really, you know, in the past, it was the amount of money that was coming out of that was covered by interest being made by the fund. Now we're at the point where it's not, it's depleting the fund. So we have talked about measures to reduce those costs, but I really do hate to see a reduction of the amount of time that NRDP's spending on this stuff, because they're an important piece to this whole puzzle. So I would like to make some recommendations on looking at how we can fund that not out of the BAO fund. Let's put it that way. And then that preserves more of the money that we have to actually do restoration projects. As I pointed out in that original spreadsheet that you saw, there was almost $500,000 out of a fund of 5.5 million last year that came out for admin costs, and then these extra costs for CD compliance. So with that, that's kind of where we're at, and the challenges that we're trying to overcome in this next year. We've been having a series of meetings on what is our best option to preserve this fund to do restoration projects in the basin. So with that, if anybody has questions, I'd be happy to answer questions on it.
Bill Schenk here. Just one really quick question is for any Elizabeth or Pat. Is the time it takes for the remediation portion expected, or are they behind schedule? I mean, is this amount of time that we're talking about here unexpected or not?
This is Pat. Bill, I would say that we're clearly behind schedule in Butte. The consent decree, well, actually before the consent decree, there was an agreement in principle that came out in 2018. All parties agreed to what work they would do. And then it was another 2 years before that was captured in the consent decree. And here we are almost 5 years later, and we've only seen one project with the shovel in the ground. So yes, I would say we are behind schedule. Looking forward, will it go faster? I don't know. One of the big things that we argued for during consent decree negotiations was to name a repository to where all the contaminated materials would go. And at this point, we still do not know where this repository will be located. So those are the hurdles and the challenges that we face. Is there a path forward? Yes, but I'm afraid that it is a very long path, and I don't know that any of us will still be in office or on staff when all these problems are solved.
Thank you.
This is Christy Beal. Elizabeth, I have a question. I mean, I know it's looking back a little bit for you, but for our advisory council, I guess have you guys ever utilized a matching requirement?
This is Elizabeth Erickson. Yes, on all of our grants, we encourage the matching, and in fact, on that small projects, all of those projects were picked basically on one of the criteria was matching funding.
Right. Thank you. Does anyone else have questions on the trustees or comments?
This is Doug Martin. I would ask Elizabeth, you made a statement earlier about the administrative fees for, and this is a clarifying statement, the administrative fees for the BAO compared to the Upper Clark Fork. I do know that the administrative percent, the percent that we take out for Butte Area 1 is approximately 12%, and the Upper Clark Fork Basin pays over 40% of the fees. So I think on the spreadsheet that where it says 2024 general liabilities, expenses, and revenues for the Upper Clark Fork, it's a positive number. I think that's based, yeah, maybe Miranda can address that if she could, just for clarification, because I think that was your question, correct?
Yes, so a significant portion of that difference is that in the last fiscal year, we settled with Libby OU3. And part of that settlement included paybacks to the administrative costs that that were footed for several years before we had some funding for Libby. So that was, I think, approximately 160-ish thousand that went back to the 1001, which is our admin costs, which was split between the funds as they would have been expensed at the time that those costs were incurred. And I don't remember exactly what came back to each fund. It's a little different for each of those fiscal years. But I do know that obviously because the Upper Clark Fork holds most of the general expenses, it got the largest reimbursement. So that's a big chunk of that. The other part of that is that within the Upper Clark Fork fund, the way that one is shown, those are only general expenses, where in the BAO fund, that line that says general expenses, revenues and liabilities includes our actual administrative costs, and then also the it's org 10220, but it's Butte direct expenses like staff time and other I would say minimal operating expenses, but they don't go to any of the specific categories. They're split between the categories, and that's not a factor in the Upper Clark Fork. So there's not that also additional expense in that one particular line.
So this is Doug. I don't know if you understood that or not, but in layman terms, for the staff, if we are working on an aquatics project, we charge to the aquatic code. So you're not seeing that in the totals. It gets charged to aquatics. Where on the BAO, when we were working on the consent decree issues, that does get charged to what Miranda was saying, is that 10220. That's a code that we have. And that does go just to that general expense. That's where that is showing up on BAO. That's why there is that difference there. If you saw all our staff time, for instance, Nathan, who was talking to you earlier, all of his time basically gets charged, except when he's working on another site in the Upper Clark Fork, goes to aquatics. That's what he is working on. So his costs would show up under the aquatics column, not under a general account. Different than, that's the way it's set up differently for Butte.
So because we don't have a category for CD stuff, that goes into the general. Okay.
Yes, this is Doug. That is correct. Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Thanks.
Are there any additional questions on Butte Area 1 Restoration Plan update? All right. And that includes for the public.
Did you want to take some from the public, Madam Chair?
Yes. Questions from the public, please?
Yeah, this is John Sesso again. I would just urge consideration of the point that Elizabeth made regarding the state speaking with one voice on your comments to the anything having to do with the consent decree. I mean, if you look at what you just presented with respect to the return of the Parrot dollars, split 51, 35, 14 amongst the three things, and you speak of the reduction in the surplus from the Parrot being taken out of the Parrot money at those percentages to do a lot of monitoring relative to the CD. At very least, dollars spent by the NRD staff to comment on CD documents should be split the same way, 51, 35, 15. But most importantly, the state needs to be speaking with one voice, the Department of Environmental Quality making comments and working to implement the consent decree as it was enacted into law, and the NRD commenting as well. That, to me, that's a double whammy in terms of costs. And I would ask that the state, working through its two departments, try to do their very best to speak with one voice and not have a hit from both sides being charged to the Butte Area 1 fund. I think that's very important. Thank you.
Christy Beal, does anyone have any additional comments or questions from the public? All right, and that was with respect to the Butte Area 1 Restoration Plan, which is the last item on our agenda to be updated. So at this point in time, before we adjourn, I'd take any public questions or comments in general. Okay, hearing none, then I'm going to adjourn the meeting. Thank you all.